Welcome to the Hymancast, a podcast of the Hyman Settlement School, where we explore the history, culture, and people that make the Hyman Settlement School what it is today, and how this historic institution will continue to serve its mission of celebrating heritage and changing lives in Central Appalachia. I'm Corey Terry. And welcome to episode 33 of the Hymancast, the very first episode of 2026. We're getting right back started here in 2026 with the Hymancast, and it's kind of a rough start to the new year so far. If you are anywhere in the eastern or southern part of the country right now, you are bracing yourself for Snowmageddon 2026 to start off the new year. And well, I was going to say thankfully, but we were actually here in Kentucky. We're projected to get a lot more snow initially, but now they're saying a lot more ice, and that's actually worse in my opinion. I would rather have 2 feet of snow than a quarter inch of ice. That sounds a lot more enjoyable. But we'll see how it shakes out this weekend. But while you are locked inside of your home and braving the weather, we have a great episode lined up for you to listen to while you are locked inside your house. And for this month's episode, we got Holly Hightchew of Lighthouse to Literacy sitting down with our dyslexia program director, Kayla Thacker, and they discuss a lot about dyslexia, ways to be an advocate for students with dyslexia, and how you can also teach them to be an advocate for themselves in their lives, and just different practical ways in which we can help dyslexic students to grow and to learn to read and to thrive in their life. So it's a great episode. Holly is highly intelligent about these things, and she actually works here with us as a consultant and with our dyslexia program, and she comes pretty regularly and trains our AmeriCorps tutors who work in the schools with dyslexic students on a daily basis. So she's been around the settlement school for a little bit and has been a valuable treasure here for us, and has a great conversation with Kayla today. So without further ado, we'll get to their conversation.
All right, welcome back to another Hyman podcast. This one is centered around our dyslexia program. My name is Kayla Thacker. I'm the director of dyslexia programming at Hyman, and I'm going to be your host today. And I'm super excited to introduce our guest today, Ms. Holly Hightchew of Lighthouse to Literacy. We got connected with Holly through some of our board members and education committee members at Hyman, and we've been doing some collaboration, and she's been doing some consulting for us, and she is just a wealth of knowledge. She has lots of experience in training and working with some of the most profoundly dyslexic students. So she has a really good, interesting viewpoint to share with us today. So thank you so much for joining us today.
I'm excited to be here.
And so I guess we should start by letting our listeners know just a little bit about who you are and how you became such a passionate advocate for dyslexia.
Well, it actually started before I was even born. We didn't know it, but my father had severe dyslexia. I did know that he couldn't read, and I did know that as a child he had suffered abuse because of it, and he had this feeling of being worthless because he couldn't read. But if you knew my father, that was not how you would describe him. He was a wonderful man, father, husband. And so we knew that he had trouble reading, but we didn't know, there was no name for it at that time, and there was no name for it when he was in school. And then I have dyslexia as well, but mine is not, you don't see it on the academic side. I have, I love to read books. I love to read a novel over a weekend. And so the reality is I kind of have 2 people to thank for that. I had a 2nd grade teacher named Edith Courtney who really inspired me to read. And then I had a little girl that would sit with me on the school bus, and she was older than I was, and she was kind of popular, and everybody really liked her. And she would ride to school with me for 30 minutes on the school bus and on the way back, and she would have me read books to her. And then she would put stickers on my lunchbox if I did a good job. So that's kind of how I started. So I really didn't know that there was, so I knew that I always was worried I wasn't reading well, but I didn't, it never showed up on any of my testing. So I was always a good reader. So we didn't become connected until, like so many people who are involved in the dyslexia world, my own daughter was born. Dyslexia is hereditary, so she got it from me and my dad, and she has what you would call profound dyslexia. So it impacts pretty much every aspect of her life. So in this journey with her, I've learned a lot about dyslexia. I've been trained in lots of different programs of dyslexia, and it was my desire to help her succeed, and then that shifted to a desire to help all children with dyslexia to succeed and be able to read, and I want them to know the sky is the limit, that they are only limited by their own imaginations about what they are capable of doing. So that's how that started. It was just my family, my heritage, but most of all, my daughter, Becca.
Yeah, well, I think that that's interesting because I think there's several things that people don't always know, and that is that dyslexia is an inherited condition, and also thinking about how we didn't have a name for it. And I can think of people in my own family as well who had some of those characteristics. And you said something really important in training that I kind of connected with, which was we see people who are very gifted, and sometimes they'll hold themselves back in job roles because they don't feel comfortable with the reading or the writing aspect. So they stay kind of stationary in a role instead of being able to kind of do what you want for Becca, which was reach for the stars, right?
Right.
And then also very interesting about thinking about dyslexia not affecting reading.
Right.
I think that we often think that those two are synonymous, so we say dyslexia and we automatically think reading difficulty. So I think it's very interesting to think about the fact that you can be dyslexic and also be a good reader. And I know we're going to get into this some later on, but I would like you to share, like, in talking about that profound for our audience, what does that mean if you are profound? Can we talk a little bit about that progression so that people understand that you that you could be a good reader and still be dyslexic?
Yeah. So usually my profound children, when we have, so I kind of feel like there's like different levels of dyslexia. And by the way, no dyslexia looks exactly the same. Mm-hmm. Every child is very different. And so for profound dyslexia, it's where it really impacts a lot of their life. It might not just be the reading. It's also the handwriting. It's also the math. Like that profoundness can be in all three of those categories. It also may mean that child has low working memory. So it's really hard for them to remember the details and to get to put it in that transfer to have that long-term memory, or they also may not process information the same way. Mm-hmm. So they may be slower at processing information. So for every child, it can be different. For my daughter specifically, it was the reading and the writing and the math. She had great difficulty with all of those. It was very evident, really, at 4, that there was something very different about the way she was learning to read or not learning to read. That was more the way to say that. And so I find that most children who are profoundly dyslexic, they really struggle even in kindergarten, learning their letters, hearing all the sounds in words, right? A severe child can sometimes make it past kindergarten, but that first grade becomes a real struggle for them because now we've got the silent E on the end of words, right? And we've got a couple of vowel teams like the A, Y, and play. So they struggle there, and then but most of the time people do not get caught until the 3rd grade. That's the typical thing. We catch them in 3rd grade, and a lot of those students they've went through kindergarten first, they've struggled through 2nd, but 3rd grade, now that we got all those multi-syllable words, and they just can't make it past that jump. We call it the 3rd grade brick reading wall, and that's where a lot of children get caught. And those are moderately dyslexic children, but for them, like, they've got to have direct, explicit instruction because they're going to be required to read that science book, that biology book in 9th grade, and they do not have the skills to do that. So they need to learn how to break those words apart, multi-syllable words, and learn the reading rules for those. And it also picks spelling. So here's the thing. Some people, you can't tell by their reading, but you can tell by their spelling because they're spelling exactly what they hear you say. Like if I say the word, and I'm going to say this word because in Kentucky we all say this, we say this wrong. Like we say, go get me something, get, right? G-I-T. And so they're going to spell it G-I-T.
Right.
We both know that word is actually get, right? And so it's spelled G-E-T, but they all spell it exactly like they hear us say it. And so they don't memorize the words. They're trying to sound them out and spell them based on the way they sound, but a lot of words don't play fair, so it gives them a disadvantage. So that profoundly dyslexic are those kids who are really impacted from day one, getting off the educational starting block. You can have children who are mildly dyslexic, and that's probably where I was in, or even stealth dyslexia, where it didn't show up for me, where it shows up for me in my driving, right? I know that's and I would not have known that had it not been for Henry Winkler from the Fonts of Happy Days.
Yeah.
It was also in his driving as well. And, that was where it was mine. And so even today, like when I get to the end of a road and my GPS says left, I have to really think about, is that left or which one is it? So, so for some children, for me, I was more mildly, and you might just see little things like that for them. But those profoundly dyslexic children, they really need, from the get-go, they need someone to come alongside them who can teach them the reading rules, help them hear the sounds, teach them the spelling rules, and advocate for them and be a cheerleader, because it's hard work. What they're going to have to go through is hard work. My daughter has worked extremely hard. I consider her one of the hardest working children I know, because she's learned to read. She learned to work hard through her academics, and then she's been a hard worker in other areas of her life, but those academics were really hard for her.
Yeah, I think that has something to say about resilience and the fact that dyslexic children are often really resilient. I was reading about Louisa Moats had posted some debunking myths, and one thing that she had said was dyslexia is not a gift. And I had to think about that for a minute, because I was like, but her reasoning was, she said, no, students who have dyslexia are resilient, and they have to go through kind of like what you were talking about with Becca, in some cases, a lot of work to be successful at something. So telling them they have a gift when they have to do that much work is kind of...
It doesn't feel like a gift.
It doesn't feel like a gift. Yeah, even though and so at first I was like, but it could be a gift, because we talk about all the ways that dyslexic students are gifted, which there are many ways. And so I thought that was really interesting to think about, because in truth, dyslexic kids are really gifted in other ways a lot of the time.
Yes.
With several tests.
They're not going to feel like their dyslexia is a gift, but there are other skills they have that they are really good at that help reward all that hard work they're putting in on the academic side. So for my daughter, just so you know, to be a dyslexic student, to finish the same assignment that your peers are completing in class, you have to work 5 times as hard. So that 5 times on every single, homework page you have, or reading assignment you have, or all those 25 math problems, for them that feels like an immense amount of hard work. And you can see that, because sometimes when a child comes home after a full 8-hour day of school, and then they got another hour of homework, which would seem an hour, for them that turns into a lot more like 2 to 2.5 to 3 hours worth of homework, because it's so difficult for them. But then at the same time, they do have these gifts. And so I've not met a person yet who was dyslexic who did not have shine in one area of their life. Uncovering it takes a little bit of time. And for Becca, it did too. We had to uncover what she was really good at. But they all have that something that they're really good at. And usually it has nothing to do with the academic side. It's something to do with, hands-on, visual, or, mechanical, the things that they're really good at. So,
yeah, I actually shared that. You're exactly right. And I actually shared that statistic. I did a training a few weeks ago, and I shared with educators the statistic about homework, because I wanted them to think about what they're asking, because I think sometimes as educators we send stuff home and we don't think about the process of what we're really asking them to do at home. And I think when you have that glaring statistic about how long it really takes, and so what you may consider 15 or 20 minutes, and this shouldn't be too bad, it shouldn't take up too much of your time, really can turn into something else.
Right. Well, think about it like this. So you're going to work an 8-hour day today. I'm going to work an 8-hour day today, right? And so if I told you that at the end of the day you had to go home and read for 20 minutes. Now, 20 minutes doesn't sound like a lot of time, but times that by 5. And now we're looking at an hour and 40 minutes of reading. What child do you know wants to go home tonight and do that much reading? Because that's what it feels like to them. It's the heavy lifting their brain has to do, especially after such a long day of being in school all day. So it's the heavy lifting that their brain has to do. And it wears them out. So lots of times, even children at school, around 2 o'clock, they're exhausted. And it's because their brain's been doing all that heavy lifting. And so we don't see that. It's not apparent. We're not watching them exercise their brains. But for them, they can feel it. They can feel how difficult this is.
Yeah, and then imagine adding on basketball or soccer or sports, some of which they probably could be really good at. That might be their thing to shine at.
Absolutely.
And then you have this overhang of homework to deal with as well. I kind of want to shift into, you've told us a lot about your background, and so you kind of have this interesting perspective because you're both a professional and a parent, and I think that makes you and dyslexic yourself. So that makes you in my book, maybe a super advocate.
Probably.
But it also makes you really unique. And so I'm interested in how your being a professional in the field kind of changed the way you advocate for students with dyslexia.
So because I had Becca and because of her profoundness, I learned really quickly not only to advocate for her, but also to teach her how to advocate for herself. And so as a professional, I do a very similar thing. I really feel like it's my job to advocate for those children who cannot speak for themselves. And so whether I'm being a professional or a mom, you might say that I feel like I'm a mom of lots of kids, because I feel like when I meet a child who has dyslexia and they're really struggling, like I almost take them under my wing and say, okay, I'm going to help you overcome this. I'm going to help you find your gifts. I'm going to help you learn to read. I'm going to help you be able to stand up for yourself and advocate, right? So I don't really see that there's much of a difference, other than if you ask Becca, my daughter Becca, she would say early on, like, but you're my mom, right? And I get that. And we've had many conversations about that. But today, like, she's now, a grown woman. And so she says to me, like, I love that you were out there helping all these other kids as well as myself, right? And in fact, there were many times where she had said to herself, I remember this early on, she would say to herself, like, why do I have dyslexia? I don't understand this, right? It was very defeating in the beginning. Both of her siblings are, they're great students. They're high academic students. And so for her, she could see the difference between how they did things and how she did things. And she would question, why do I have dyslexia? But now if you ask Becca why she has dyslexia, she would say, so that my mom knew how to help other children just like me, and that she was going to be this ferocious lion out there for lots of kids, not just her cub, right? And in fact, I say this all the time. One day I'm going to have a T-shirt that's going to say, and it's going to have a dragon slayer on there with like the big sword and everything and the shield, because I feel like as dyslexia advocates, that's what we're doing. We're slaying the dragons of fear and shame and embarrassment and defeat. All those, I'm worthless, I'm useless. I see that all the time. And in fact, as you know, I've had a camp that I've ran several years, and our one rule at camp, and we only had one, was don't speak bad about yourself and don't speak bad about someone else. I think only once did I ever have to speak to a child about speaking badly about someone else, but it was a daily occurrence that I had to say, you can't speak bad about yourself either. I have to change that tape player in their head that says I'm worthless. I'm in their mind stupid. Like those are the words they'll use. And I'm like, no, that's not how we're going to do this, right? You're not. You have value. We just need to teach you how to read. And so that's why I love working with the kids that someone will say, no one's helped them. They can't be helped. They're never going to learn to read. And I'm like, oh, watch me, right? And watch them. And once they get empowered and they get the skills, then the sky is the limit. And I've had kids that went on to Governor Scholar programs. I've had kids who themselves set up their own dyslexia awareness workshops after they left, the camp program. I've had people that went out and did great things because they believed in themselves for the first time ever, and they wanted to empower other kids like themselves. I've had many students I've taught to read who will come back and be camp counselors for me because their thing, when you interview them, why do you want to do this? And the thing is, I want to do for someone else what you did for me. And that's like, to me, that's like the best payment in the world for what we're doing, right? That's why we get up every day and do it.
Yeah. And as you were speaking about those things, I was thinking about the parallels in my head for our summer school here at Hyman Settlement School. And I think that's one of the biggest things that I see with kids is that we have some kids who make years and years worth of gains, and then we have some students who may their dial pushes just a couple months, depending on the severity of their dyslexia. But what I see usually across the board for all students is they almost like come alive, like they start to feel confident, and I'm sure part of it is an encouraging environment, but I also think that some of it has to do with peers. They see other people like themselves, and so then they start to recognize strengths maybe that they didn't even know they had. And that's one of my favorite parts about summer school is I literally watch them all on the first week, that everybody's kind of shy, and we have like PE out here, and everybody's kind of figuring out what they're going to do or where they are. And then usually by week 2, there's like full-on football games and all this stuff happening, and it's just, you can literally watch them. I've watched students who literally I watched a parent like give that nice little shove into it. It's just like, you are going in. And I was like, oh man, this is going to be a long summer. And by day 3, that kid was jumping out of the car, slamming the door and running in. And so I just think that's a really valuable thing to think about. And so I want to talk about, we talked about helping them feel encouraged or motivated, and I'm going to wonder how can we as adults, what are some things that we can do, parents, educators, what are some things that we can do to when we're approaching students with dyslexia? What are some suggestions that you could give us that we could do?
Well, I think the first thing is identifying that a child has dyslexia. I think it's wonderful that you have the Hyman Settlement School and that you actually do assess for dyslexia, and you can help parents get on the right track. But I think a lot of times the parent realizes there's something different here. I'm not for sure why little Johnny's not reading yet. And so you go to the teacher and you ask the teacher, hey, it's kind of concerning me. All my kids were reading at this point, but he's not reading. And then the teacher oftentimes will say, oh, well, they just need to mature a little bit more, or they just need a little bit more time. But parents kind of know in their gut, like, something's not right here. So something's going on. So I think the first thing I would say is, if you're an educator and you've got a parent who's coming to you and saying, hey, is there something that I'm missing here? And they're asking you as the educator, you're the professional, they're asking you for help. They're setting up that white flag that says, hey, I need some help here. Something's not right? So the first thing is to take those comments by adults, by parents, seriously, to not like negate them, shove them aside, but to say, well, let's look into that. Let's find out. And so, like, for you guys in your area, they can go to the Hyman Settlement School, and you guys will assess them. Now, in some states, it's a 2-year waiting list to get an assessment or a diagnosis. So it's a long time of a wait. So 2 years, think about how much education has happened in that 2 years if you're going to wait, right? Mm-hmm. So I encourage parents to follow their gut and don't wait, and to kind of press in on those educators, say, I need some help. I think my child is struggling, and I don't think it's just the fact that maybe they're the youngest that I have, and that they need a little bit more time. Mm-hmm. During those COVID years, sadly, we had a lot of parents who were told that, well, everybody's behind because of COVID, so it's just normal. But that's not really true. These students, it's a different kind of, I'm not catching on to my ABCs, right? It's different than that. And so encouraging parents by saying, okay, I'm listening to you, and I'm here to help, right? I want your child to be successfully read. And the other thing is listen to the students, because they will tell you. If I talk to most students when I'm doing an assessment with a child, one of the things I ask them is like, how does, your inability to read, how does that make you feel? And they'll say the normal things. I think I'm stupid. I think I'm useless. They'll use words like that. And then at the same time, they describe it as feeling trapped in their own body, because they think in their mind, as they're with all their peers and they're having fun out on the football field, they feel like I'm smart. I know all these plays and I know how to do all these things. But then they get in the classroom and they feel really, really small, right? And they say, I don't feel like I belong in my own body. Like something, they understand themselves, something isn't right, but they don't know how to describe it or put their finger on it or, know until someone comes along and helps them. So I think the biggest thing is raising awareness that dyslexia affects 20% of the population. That's 1 in every 5 children. So if you have a classroom of 20 children, and I'm the first grade teacher and I've got 20 children sitting there in front of me, 4 of them have dyslexia. Now, they may have it at different levels. I might have a mild student, a moderate student, a profound student, a severe student. I may have 4 different levels of dyslexia, but I should be able to identify 4 kids in those 20 that their reading seems to be labored or learning their ABCs seems really difficult for them. Even though we go over it and over it and over again, they're not catching on. So it's raising awareness with teachers and parents, and then when someone sends up the red flag to say, okay, I'm going to look into this more, I'm going to figure this out, because for my own daughter, it was the same thing. I actually, believe it or not, and I actually listened to your last podcast with the 2 young ladies that you interviewed, and she said that that when she had her dyslexia, that there were some things that were difficult for her to do, and that people just didn't understand, like she was trying to explain that to them. So for my daughter, she's talking about the words, like they get all scrambled on the page. For my daughter, she's like, Mom, letters are moving off the page on me. And I was like, what do you mean? So I took her to the eye doctor, and they were like, oh, she's 20/20, everything's perfect, right? So, this was probably as early as 3 that she was saying, some things are moving around on me. And so at some point, as her mom, even though all these people were telling me at the doctor, she's great, she's wonderful, right? Then I'm like, okay, but I still know something's not clicking here. And then that's when we went on the dyslexia journey and found I'd already heard about dyslexia and went to some workshops, but I never actually taught someone with dyslexia before, so that was my first time. And then when I realized that what was happening, you have a little bit of mom guilt, because you're like, when she tells you all those words, well, the doctor says you're 20/20 vision, or the doctor says you're perfectly healthy, or the doctor says you're not getting stomach aches or headaches. You're just kind of making that up, right, when you're trying to read words. So all of those things, let's follow. Like, we should be listening. As educators, we should be listening. And we're going to hear about it from the parents, but we're also going to have the kids say. I actually went by and saw one of your tutors teaching one of the schools today, and the little boy says, this is really hard for me, right? And and then he said, can I lay my head on the table? Because he was already tired. It was worrying him out having to do those phonemic awareness exercises. They get tired. Let's listen to what they're saying. Let's listen to what their bodies are telling us.
Yeah, I think there's a lot of valuable input in that, because I do think that we do have to listen to children, and I think that we have to think about it as working together, like parents along with teachers and the child, to kind of really develop a plan. Like, it can't be a plan developed just by the school. Like, that input has to happen, I think, from all sides, because parents are a really valuable part of that, because they have insight for what that student looks like outside of the walls of a school building, right?
I want to pause for a second from the conversation with Holly and share something else with you that highlights the work of our dyslexia program. And that is a conversation that we recently had with a former student named Hannah Ritchie. We recently sat down and talked to her about her experience growing up with dyslexia and what it was like whenever she discovered Hyman Settlement School, and how that really turned things around for her in her life and got her on a path to being able to read, and the success that she had with that. So it's just a great story to hear the impact that our dyslexia program has on students. So here it is.
All through elementary school, I really struggled in school and was told by a lot of different people that it was my eyes or other things. And I had a program in Somerset that was through Hyman that met every Monday for 3 hours. And we would go through different Hyman books And I remember that I all of a sudden was able to read, and that had never happened to me before. And I was actually able to focus and do well in school, and I was able to enjoy reading in the sense of, for the first time ever, I could sit down and pick up a book and actually engage in that. And that was a huge opening to me. Before I learned how to read, I remember always sitting in class being petrified of the teacher calling on me, or being petrified of having to do any problems. And then all of a sudden not being so scared of, oh, look, I can actually read in front of my peers, or hey, I can actually do this, and it may take me longer than everyone else, but if I work hard and study, I can actually get good grades. In 6th grade, I really struggled and didn't do well in school, and I remember 7th grade, 8th grade, all throughout high school, getting all A's and B's throughout school, and that was just a huge accomplishment for me.
The difference that Heinemann made for me as a parent is that it took me a full 180 from desperation to hope. I knew that they were offering something different, and Heinemann is the hinge on which a world of opportunities opened for our family to find success, and Hannah receiving an excellent education.
I'm from a family who loves to read, and all my sisters love to read, and I have a sister that's very close in age to me. And I remember just being like so sad and just like heartbroken that she was reading books 10 times my level. But I remember for the first time that I actually read a book that wasn't for like little kids, and I think I was 13 or 14, and it was the first time that I truly sat down and got to read a book that wasn't a picture book, and was like, wow, this is so cool. I can read. And like, I was 13, and like, it was really hard that for 13 years I wasn't able to do something that like 6-year-olds could do. And just realizing that it doesn't matter where anyone else is at. It doesn't matter where anyone else is at. The fact that I was able to do something so hard for myself, and like, I did that. My brain is smart, and I had the tools it took to use my brain, and all I needed were the tools, and I was able to use it.
So that made me think of when we were talking about that relationship between like what happens to a student in school and kind of the path that they go on if you suspect that something isn't right, and what you should do or can do. And it made me think about, I think a place we often go to is retaining a student. I know that often happens sometimes in kindergarten, very often in 1st grade, and sometimes also in 3rd grade. Those seem to be the big ones. And I'm just interested to know what you think about retainment for a dyslexic student, and is that ever an option, or should it ever be an option?
That's a really good question. So I get this a lot when I work with schools. I get this a lot. So if a child, let's just say that they're a young kindergarten student, right, and their birthday, depending on how their birthday falls, that's a great time to say, oh, we're going to take an extra year here maybe, and, retain them, let them have a little bit more time to get used to those, the alphabet and the sounds that they make. However, when I say that, when we retain a child, we need to know how to educate that dyslexic child. So you can retain a child and they can complete kindergarten again, but if we teach it the same exact way we did before, guess what? They're going to get to the end of that kindergarten year and have the same results, right? So if we're going to retain a child, I'm not against in those very early ages doing that, but we have to have a plan, because I feel like it's like this. If I have a circle up here, I've got a little box that's in a circle shape, but then I actually take a square and I'm trying to shove it in the circle, right? And it doesn't fit. That's sort of like what happens with them. I'm using a program to help teach them, and I'm trying to get them to understand that program. If they didn't the first time, they're probably not going to do it the second time, right? So that's why I love what you guys are doing in the school system, because you're actually taking Orton Gillingham into the schools, and you're doing it with these students, and you're giving that, now you're actually matching the way they learn up to the curriculum that they're being taught by, right? So if you're going to do that, I think that's awesome. Like, give them an extra year to kind of get caught up with their peers. But what ends up happening is sometimes we get to that 3rd grade year and we're like, oh, well, we need to retain them. Well, a lot is going on there. Like, they've already made good friends, and now all of a sudden you're going to be, it's like they feel like they're being punished. And they shouldn't be punished for their dyslexia. That's they don't choose to be dyslexic. They shouldn't be punished for that. Then be held out. Then they be taken away from all their friends, right? But you also have to worry about this a little bit too. You have to look at the long-term picture, not just today, right? So let's just say I have a child who's actually happens to be one of the older first graders, right? And then I'm going to hold them back. So now they're 19 when they graduate, right? And so we know that if we don't do a really good job of educating them, right, at 18, they hit the road. They're like, I'm done. I won't finish school, right? And that's what happens. So we have to be really clear that we need to look at the long game as well as the right now. And I believe that right now, if we can benefit that child by holding back, because we're going to teach them in the way they learn, then I'm okay with that. But when they get older, as that gets over, what's going to happen is you're not going to have a 19, 20-year-old who's going to stay in school. Unless their parents are really saying, no, you have to finish, they bow out because they're just discouraged at that point. So especially if they haven't learned to read. And I'm not going to lie to you, I sometimes see a 6th grader who doesn't know how to read. And I sometimes see, it's not uncommon for me to work with 17-year-olds who are reading at a kindergarten level. And so to me, it's, what do you do? Well, the thing we have to do is teach them the way they learn. And that's what Orton Gillingham does for them. That's why I love what you guys are doing in the schools. I love what you're doing here in the summertime. I always wanted to come see Hyman, so I've always thought this is a wonderful thing for me because I'd heard about all the work you've done in dyslexia. And so this was kind of like a dream come true for me to come down here and now to see how your program works and all the kids that you're helping. And so I love that.
Well, we've certainly enjoyed having you here, and your expert advice and the ideas that you bring to the table, and your really out-of-the-box thinking and advocacy for thinking about exactly what a student needs and thinking more individually about students, thinking prescriptively.
Yes.
And so I kind of want to shift into parents, and let's talk about early identification. I know you said, parents often know that something's maybe off here. So maybe if a parent's unsure right now, or maybe they're kind of listening to this and they're thinking maybe possibly, what are some things, or how early should they be looking for signs?
Well, I know that's a good question, and it can be really early, a lot earlier than we think. So even at the age of 2.5, kids are starting to put their shoes on their feet. And if you have a child who consistently keeps putting their shoes on the wrong feet, right? This is like a sign something's going on here. Or they're having really a difficult time dressing themselves. I know some 6 to 7-year-olds who still put their shirts on backwards every day, right? So there's things that they can do that okay, they're doing this a little bit off. Their brothers didn't do this. They didn't put their shoes on the wrong feet, or their sisters didn't wear their shirts backwards, right? Those are things that we can kind of say, oh, okay. And it could be just that they haven't learned those skills yet. But then when you get into they say words wrong. So I'll just say a big one is, I'd say to the child, animal, and they'll go aminal, right? And for my own daughter, the word was ketchup. She would say cabbage. And even though we would practice and practice and practice, she would say cabbage. And she had all the right sounds, but she brought them out of her brain in the wrong order. And so she would mispronounce words. So that's another big one. And kids start doing that at 3 and 4 years old, that you're starting to say, oh, they should know this word, but they're not pronouncing it correctly. And almost every dyslexic child I talk to, I'll say, are there any words you mispronounce? And oh, yeah. And, it's like biscotti and they all these words that they say, instead of helicopter, it's heckalopter, right? Mm-hmm. This is a common thing we see. So when you've got a child who, and then now all of a sudden they're getting ready for first grade, and you're trying to teach them to tie their shoes, and they just are having great difficulty tying their shoes. It's not uncommon for me to see 3rd graders who still can't tie their shoes, who are wearing, Velcro shoes or Crocs to school because they can't tie their shoes. Those are all little things that you can be looking for as a parent. But then things they get their B's and their D's backwards, or they get their B's and their P's. They flip their letters up and down. And I've heard this said many times, oh, dyslexia is seeing words backwards. It's not that at all. It's a directionality issue. Which direction is B going? Which direction is D going, right? Mm-hmm. But you'll see those things. Or they're writing consistently, about halfway through first grade, they should be writing all their letters the correct way. But if they're still writing their nines backwards or their threes and fives backwards, that's like an indicator that there's something going on here. And so if you have enough of those warning signs that you're like, okay, then maybe they have dyslexia. And so we need to go get that checked out, right? Because what's going to happen is it's going to be difficult for them to learn to read. And we really want to identify this in kindergarten, right? Even before they start kindergarten, so we can actually head that off at the pass. And if we start teaching them in kindergarten, many times they go through life and they never even get behind. They don't have to get behind in their reading. They can just keep moving on.
Yeah, I saw, so October was Dyslexia Awareness Month, although every month should be Dyslexia Awareness Month. And so I came across this post that had said, waiting for a student to fail at reading is too late. Giving them the opportunity to fail at reading is too late to identify dyslexia. And so I was thinking of that as you were talking, because I think we often wait until students are significantly, I think in kindergarten sometimes we think, well, maybe they just need a little more time. And then we get to first grade, and first grade, I call it the beast, because they have to do so much in first grade. And we really start to see that significant difference happening. And so then sometimes we retain, and then we're still not getting, we may make some progress, but not enough. Without intervention. And then sometimes we have kids who go through to third grade, and once, I call it the boat leaving the dock, and their boat has left the dock so far that it becomes very, very hard for them to catch up, and they know that by third grade.
Right.
We start to see all of those signs that I'm different, that I'm not as smart as, I cannot do. So I think sometimes we think we have to wait to identify dyslexia, when really it can happen very early.
Right.
As early
and so if you take third grade, and that's when you identify them, they've already went through kindergarten, first, and second grade. And they may have missed a significant portion of the learning that was supposed to take place in those grades. So they could be 3 years behind in third grade, right? And so when you have that happen, right, it's going to be hard to catch those children up, right? That's going to be it's going to be a task, not only for the tutor and for the child, but the parent at home. There's going to be a lot that's going to be done to help catch that child up with 3 years. And here's one thing I want to say is, we always say, a little progress is good. Well, that is true, but children should be making a year's worth of progress in a year's worth of time, right? So if you have children who are in third grade, they're 2 years behind. And even though we make a year's worth of progress, guess what? When they get to fourth grade, they're still 2 years behind, right? So that progress has got to be really quick, and we need to bring them up as quickly as we can. That takes a lot of time. That takes effort on everyone's part, which is, like I said, when I'm, looking at the schools that you guys are in right now, you're sitting down with those students and you're trying to, help them make those gains, as fast as you can. And between what you do here in the summer, what you do with your after school tutoring, what you do in the classrooms, you're giving those kids an opportunity to try to make up some of those gains that they need to make. Yeah.
So let's talk about, so you did an excellent job of talking about what parents can recognize early at home, even before school starts. So if I am a parent who thinks that my child might have dyslexia, let's talk about all the different avenues that you could take to figure that out, because that is
it's tricky.
That's a tricky topic.
It's tricky. I would love to say that you could, there's a difference between assessing a child to see if they have the dyslexia tendencies. And you guys do that at Hyman. I do that, right? There's a difference in that and getting a diagnosis. But in Kentucky, a diagnosis doesn't get you really anything different than an assessment would get you. It's making those educators aware and them helping you draft a plan, for helping that student. So many times, though, it depends on what resources are in your area. I mean, you're very lucky here that you've got this. You are fortunate to have this here, because in some states, there's no tutors. There are no people to assess the students. There are no the waiting list to get a diagnosis is 2 years long, right? So those are big gaps. So, but if you start suspecting that, the first thing I do is try to go to the school and say, hey, listen, can we do some testing? Can we see if there's something going on? And school officials have been trained, and they do know how to do that. There's a great test called the CTOP test. I know you guys give it here, but I wish we gave that to every single student in school, to see where their phonemic awareness was and what they were able to do. But the reality is, there's some tests we can do really early on with children to see if there is something more than just they need a little bit more time. But if you're in this area right here, one of the things I would advise you to do is call the Hyman Settlement School, right? And say, hey, I would really like to get my child assessed, right? Because the reality is what you guys are doing here is a fraction of the cost of what you would have to do if you went to a psychologist, a child psychologist. It can be, those tests can be anywhere from $1,600 to $3,000 for a child to get diagnosed, right? And so some parents don't have that. They're working 2 jobs, right? They don't have the money to do that. So they kind of rely on their school to do it. But when you can have a great resource like this in your backyard, I mean, that's also a wonderful thing for students. But I would just keep kind of pushing a little bit. I recently had a mom she worked for the school, so she really insisted, like, there's something going on, right? And so the reality is they kept doing different tests, but they weren't finding it. And they really need to do, so what we're looking for is, can those children hear the sound in a word? Believe it or not, lots of kids will come to me and, I may lay out my letters, ABC, all the ABCs in order, and then I'll have a child who says, oh, you're missing a letter. And I'm like, well, what letter am I missing? And they'll say, and, because they think and is a letter. They don't hear that and has 3 sounds, and, right? They don't hear that. They just hear the word and. They hear like big clumps. They don't hear all the little bitty sounds. Given enough time, a child can memorize that CAT spells cat, but they still might not know that cat is made up of these little individual sounds. Those are called phonemes, and that's phonemic awareness. And so we should be testing that early on in our grades, and that's what that CTOP does. That's one of the tests that can do that for phonemic awareness, to say, can this child hear those sounds? Believe it or not, there are many children that I will get, because I do work with those that are mainly profound, that when I give them 3 sounds, it might be like I want them to say s, t, back to me, right? Some kids can get that. Some kids will say s. What was the other things you said, right? And they're trying to process it in their brain, and it's not working memory, because if I give them numbers, they can get the numbers. They can rattle those off really quickly. It's those sounds. But there are some children that I'll give those same exact sounds to, s, t, and they'll look at me and they'll go, da, pa, ga? Like they don't know, right? They don't even hear those sounds. And I know that sounds strange to us, but that really should be an early indicator. And we could give those tests very easily to children to say, do they have this, right? And if they don't, then we know we need to do some phonemic awareness instruction with them, some, direct explicit instruction in hearing those sounds. I will also tell you that many times I'll get kids who have been in speech for years. And the thing is, if you say bath, but the child says bath to you, right? It could be that they don't know how to make the sound, but it could also be that they're hearing you say bath. They're not hearing bath, they're hearing bath. And they're going to repeat exactly what they hear you say. That's an auditory processing issue. And so we need to discover those early for children. And sometimes those can be, like I said, discovered really early when you've got a child who's mispronouncing words. And you're like, oh, and you try to tell them, but even though you tell them it's animal, and you say it, even break it out, they still say aminal. They pull it back out in the wrong order. They got the right sounds, but they don't have them in the right order, which is important when you're learning to read.
Right. Yes. And so I think we often too think about, sometimes we gloss over phonemic awareness maybe, and we jump into the phonics. And so thinking about all the things that your brain has to do to read, I think that it's alarming for some people to realize that reading is not a natural tendency, that it's something your brain has to learn to do. And so if your brain is wired differently, you have to learn to read differently. And that phonemic awareness should be important for everyone, but it's definitely important to our dyslexic students, because they need to be able to tackle that so that they can tackle those letter sound combinations and be able to really pick up those words. So I think that's a really important thing to talk about. And I want to, we touched a little bit about like what it's like to get a diagnosis, what it means to get a diagnosis in Kentucky. And so I kind of want to take a minute, like when we think about advocacy, we think about advocacy for students, and we think about them in the classroom. But we also have to think about like advocacy at, the state level or even at the national level. I was surprised. I'd gone to a conference where some school psychologists had said they're not allowed to use the word dyslexia in their state. And so I think about Kentucky, and I think about what I feel like we need to do in Kentucky, but I also am grateful that we are not one of those states. So let's think big picture. Like, if we were dreaming for dyslexic students of Kentucky, what do we hope that they receive, or we should be giving them?
Right. So here's the thing. And I know this is a big dream. Like this, I'd like to dream big, right? And so it's not just about my dyslexic students. My biggest dream would be that we actually teach children to read using the Orton-Gillingham approach, starting at the very beginning. So when if they go to preschool, that they're getting phonemic awareness in preschool. That when they get to that kindergarten, we're giving them that phonemic awareness, and we're actually teaching them how to read based on the reading rules and the spelling rules that go with words. Lots of times when I teach educators, even people who've been teaching for years, and I start showing them the rules, they're like, how comes no one's ever told us this before? Because this is so easy. And I'm like, yes, it is easy, right? But we have to teach those. So the question is, like, some people would say, well, not every kid needs that. Well, I would argue that they do. Because I meet many adults who don't have their phonemic awareness, and it impacts them, right? And when we get a child, even an adult child, even like an 18-year-old, their phonemic awareness, big things happen, like huge things. So I'll give you an example. I had a young man, his mom came to me when he was he was 18. He had signed up for the military, so he had like kind of a date he was going to be going, but he was able to take his ASVAB one more time. And so I won't use his name or anything but wonderful young man. And so I said, well, she said he got a 49 on his ASVAB before, but he wants to be a dog handler. That's what he wants to do. And he needs a 70 in the Army. So I was like, okay. And so I was like, well, how much time do I have? And she's like, we have 2 weeks for the next test. Wow. And so I'm like, I can't teach a child to learn to read in that short amount of time, but I can try to give him his phonemic awareness. And I remember for this student, we worked on it for 2 weeks solid, his phonemic awareness. And we're working with these tiles that have no letters on them. They're just blank sounds that we're working on. And we get to the end of the thing, and the last thing we have to do is learn to rhyme words. Like, so if you're an adult who doesn't know exactly how to rhyme words, and so I teach him how to rhyme words, and he goes, that's how you do that? I've always wanted to know that. And I'm like, that's phonemic awareness. And so for him, for many of my students, it's like when you crack open that door, you unlock the door to phonemic awareness, and they open it up, they're like, oh my goodness, this whole world exists out here I didn't know of. And so sure enough, he actually scored a 71 in just 2 weeks, 49 to a 71 in ASVAB.
That's amazing.
That's huge, right?
Yeah.
So in Kentucky, if we taught every child to read the Orton-Gillingham way, right, every child would be better readers. And sadly, when we look at the national scores, we dropped 4 points last February. We dropped 2 more points this fall in reading across the country. And here's the thing, if we taught every child to read here, they would be better readers. And how do I know that? Well, because I've actually had siblings who would come with their other siblings who were profoundly dyslexic to camp, and they were good readers. They're doing well in their class. But then we teach them how to read the Orton-Gillingham way, and all of a sudden their reading goes up 4 grade levels or 6 grade levels. It's not uncommon for us to have kids. They come to us being reading at 5th grade level, and they leave reading at a college level. So what would it look like if we, in Kentucky, we decided we're not going to ever again accept that children can't read? We're going to say that every child is going to learn to read. And what we do is we make sure that every child gets we're going to teach them all the dyslexia way. And the thing is, our dyslexic kids wouldn't get behind. They would learn to read. And then all the other kids would be better readers because of it. And by the way, this isn't just for dyslexic students. Like, I have seen autistic students that you start putting them on an Orton-Gillingham program, and in 7 months, they've actually excelled 2 grade levels, right? This is not uncommon. So what happens if we would just teach everyone to read this way, right? And everyone be better readers. So my vision for Kentucky is that every classroom is trained in Orton-Gillingham. We all do it. We teach everyone to read this way, and we come out on the top of the leader charts. And everybody in Kentucky, it's acceptable that everybody learns to read. We don't accept that someone can't. We're going to find a way to help them learn to read, like, no matter what.
Yeah, I think we often hear about the Mississippi Miracle.
Yes,
and it'd be great if we had
we
had a Kentucky Miracle.
Kentucky is capable of doing this because I'll tell you why. We have some of the most compassionate, wonderful teachers who they want to do what's right by their kids. They are good. Like, I went into all your schools and I just see all the wonderful teachers you have here. They want to help these children too. I just need to teach them all how, right? That's what we need to do, is teach them all how, so that we can all be working with one goal in mind, that every child learns to read. So
Awesome. Well,
That's a big dream.
it is a big dream. But if we're all talking about if we're all moving in that direction and talking about, where we need to go or what kids need, then we have a better chance of getting there and making that miracle happen, or making that big dream a reality. And so we're reaching the point where we're going to close out today. And I just want to tell you thank you. I appreciate your insight and your time that you have given us today. And as we close, I just have a few rapid answer questions for you. So a book that you think that every parent should read.
So I would read Your Teenager Is Not Crazy by Joshua Clark. She's great. It's a great book on all the things that's going on in your child's brain, all this brain science. And sometimes we don't understand our teenagers. And the reality is because their brain's doing a lot of crazy things. So as parents of teenagers, which we're all going to have, they're all going to grow up to be teenagers one day, that's a great book to read. So Your Teenager Is Not Crazy. That's a great book.
Yeah, I'm definitely going to have to look that up. I don't have teenagers, but I work with a lot of teenagers,
Yes.
and I often wonder, why are you doing that? So I need to understand them as well.
Yes.
Okay, tell me one strategy that has worked best in your household.
Well, there's a couple, but probably one of the biggest things that I think is that, and I say this to a lot when I'm doing training, even teachers, I learned at a very, we were kind of late parents, having our kids later in life. And so I learned really early that kids will believe whatever you say the loudest. So if you get up in the morning and you're yelling at them because they didn't find their shoes and they don't know where their backpack or their homework is, right? And you're frustrated, and that happens. We all get frustrated sometimes. You're going to be late for the school bus and you're trying to hurry them up and you're saying a lot of things passionately. Then when you do that, when you go to bed at night and you say, I love you, don't whisper it. Instead, say it fiercely and passionately, because they're going to believe what we say the loudest. And so we talk very passionately in our home, and we talk very passionately positive things to let our kids know that they are absolutely loved no matter what.
That's great advice. All right, one word of encouragement for somebody with dyslexia.
The smartest people I know are dyslexic. 50% of the nation's top CEOs are dyslexic. 60% of NASA astronauts are dyslexic. The smartest people I know are dyslexic. So you could be that person.
Yeah, that's really powerful and a good note to end on. So thank you, everybody, for joining us today.
And with that, we thank you, Kayla and Holly, for coming by and having this conversation for us today. And I really appreciated Holly's words and wisdom there, and especially there towards the end when she was talking about, I think it was a parenting tip, and she was saying, our kids are going to believe what we say the loudest. So instead of, letting ourselves get frustrated or angry with things that we don't, that aren't going our way, and yelling at them about it, we should instead yell things like "we love you" the loudest, instead of letting those being the quietest things that we say, so that they believe that we do really truly love them, and we don't think they're a burden or anything of that nature by yelling at them all the time about things that annoy us or frustrate us. So that was some good parenting advice for me. I really appreciated that as a father of four. And I'll also leave a link in the show notes about the book that she mentioned, Your Teenager Is Not Crazy, if you're interested in finding that resource as well. And also, if you have a student who is showing dyslexia characteristics or has dyslexia, and you would like to receive services for that, then we encourage you to please contact our dyslexia program here at Hyman Settlement School. You can reach out to Kayla or Melissa there at kayla@hyman.org, or Melissa, I think she's just Melissa. There's two Melissas here. Melissa at hyman.org as well. And reach out to them, or you can also call 606-785-4044 to get in touch with them directly and see what services we can offer. We have screenings pretty regularly to identify those characteristics of dyslexia, and also our summer school program, after school programs, and our in-school programs if you are in one of the I think 6 counties that we are in throughout the Eastern Kentucky region. But yeah, please check that out if you are in need of those services. And with that, we will see you next time. My name is Corey Terry.
The Heineman Cast is brought to you by the faithful and generous supporters of the Heineman Settlement School. For over 100 years, we've been celebrating heritage and changing lives in Central Appalachia. If you're interested in supporting the work of Heineman Settlement School, you can go to our website at www.heineman.org, or you can follow us on Facebook and Instagram at the handle @Heineman School.